But there's something about Van Gogh's legacy which is much more important than his fathering this or that ism of modern art. Vincent's passionate belief was that people wouldn't just see his pictures, but feel the rush of life in them.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most credible voice in true crime. It's been exactly 25 days since Vincent van Gogh wrote to his mother on the 20th of February 1890. And if you can remember that letter, it was quite an upbeat letter in which he sort of talked about the praise and the opinion that the art critic Albert Arles gave him, and he was sort of talking about leaving the asylum as well. He talked about at first being kind of offended by what the art critic wrote, and then later on being surprised and, in his words, even very much cheered by it. But kind of in this letter he was talking also about working for some time in Arles, and that he might want to go to Antwerp, and also talking about his good fortune in selling the picture The Red Vineyard, and all of that was just 25 days earlier. And so you're entirely justified to say, what happened after that? What happened after all that good fortune? You know, he's heard from the art critic, he's heard about the sale of his artwork, and he's in a good mood. He was painting. He painted a picture to give to his brother in honor of his brother having a child, giving birth to a child whom his brother called Vincent. And now nothing. What happened? What happened in this time where there was no communication? And that is kind of going to be what we're going to be looking at in this letter from Vincent van Gogh to Theo on the 15th of March 1890, 130 years ago today. So the letter starts off very briefly. He sort of writes a very short letter of just 3 paragraphs, signs it off, and then he continues writing, and then that part of the letter is probably three or four times longer than the original letter he wrote. So his postscript is quite a lot longer than the letter itself. So I'm going to read the original part of the letter until the sign off, and then I'm going to comment after that before we get to the rest. Okay, so are you ready? My dear Theo, today I wanted to read the letters which had come for me, but I was not clear-headed enough yet to be able to understand them. However, I am trying to answer you at once, and I hope that this will clear away in a few days. Above all, I hope that you are well, and your wife and child too. Don't worry about me, even if this should last a bit longer, and write the same thing to those at home and give them the kindest regards from me. Remember me to Gogh, who wrote me a letter for which I thank him very, very much. I'm terribly dazed in the head, but must try to be patient. Once more, kindest regards to Joe and a little boy, and a handshake in thought. Ever yours, Vincent. So, the first answer, the first kind of response that we sort of have to the question, why did it take so long? Why was there this 25-day gap between the letter of the 20th of February and this letter? What is going on? And the answer is that something happened to Vincent. He had some kind of attack. He had some kind of setback. He had some kind of health issue which caused him to be kind of out of the game. Now, it's a little bit difficult to be clear what's going on because we don't have the other side of the story. We don't know when he received letters from his brother. We don't know if they took a long time to reach him. We also don't know the content of them. So we don't really know what's going on. But one thing that we do know is what the content was of Vincent's last letters, which was, I'm ready to carry on. I'm ready to get out of the asylum. He had all these plans and he was very excited, and he had quite a lot to be positive about. And then suddenly he has the setback. Now, a couple of things just to bear in mind in terms of this letter is the short introduction is quite clear, although there's a section in the middle of it that doesn't make complete sense. He talks about, he says, don't worry about me even if this should last a bit longer, and write the same thing to those at home and give them kindest regards from me. I guess what he's saying there is, don't worry about me, and tell the others at home the same thing, that they shouldn't worry about me either. So when we get it from the horse's mouth, when we get it from Van Gogh himself, he's describing his own condition as he's not clear-headed, right? He is describing his own condition as that he was struggling to understand his brother's letters, right? He was saying that he wanted to answer the letters, but he was hoping that this mental malaise, this sort of fog in his mind, would clear in a few days. And also he was just saying not to worry. He concludes by describing his condition where he says, I am terribly dazed in the head, but must try to be patient. So he's kind of talking about feelings of confusion in his mind. It's almost like literally a fog that has taken over his mind, where he can't think, and he kind of uses the word clear a few times. He talks about not being clear-headed and that he hopes it will clear away. And if you think about, and then he talks about being terribly dazed, if you think about those descriptions, none of them really conjure up a feeling of madness. It's just kind of almost a sense of weakness, or even fatigue, or maybe even dizziness, that he's struggling to concentrate. The fact that he's writing this letter, that the letter has no spelling mistakes, the letter is pretty, and obviously we haven't gone through the whole letter, that's just the first part of it. He is not self-pitiful, he's not anxious, he's not worried, he's quite clear on his own condition. I mean, the fact is he's able to diagnose himself. So if you're going to say that he's struggling with mental illness, he doesn't know what reality is, I'm not sure if that's true. So if you want the true crime rocket science diagnosis for what's going on with him, I would say it's something like he's got some pre-existing condition which is causing him to possibly faint or pass out, right? So in other words, it's not that he's got some mental disorder or schizophrenia or epilepsy or something like that. It is that he's got some other kind of condition going on which is weakening his body, and that's making it hard for him to think. It's a little bit like sleep deprivation, where your body is so weakened by lack of sleep that you obviously can't concentrate. Something like that, except it's something else. And what would fit into that diagnosis is something like an ordinary but somewhat advanced infection of syphilis, which is the syphilis has infected the body to the extent that the body is weakened, and it is to such an extent that you are now struggling to concentrate. Okay, so that could be the one thing. The other thing is, as far as I understand, between when Vincent wrote the letter of the 20th and this letter, he went to Arles. So he actually traveled to Arles, and he was in Arles. And so if you add that dimension to the context of what we know, what that possibly points to is a couple of different things. One is he may have gone to the brothel. Okay. Two, he may have gotten himself drunk again. So he's celebrating his success, because of his artwork that is sold. I mean, why would he want to leave the asylum other than to sort of enjoy his, success and kind of what has happened, the news. He wants to celebrate the news. And isn't that exactly what he did? On the other hand, you could say that the exertion of leaving the asylum either made him anxious in certain ways that brought on a certain kind of attack, or that which is kind of similar, the strain, the physical strain of, I guess, getting on a cart and going across the countryside in March 15th, or between February and March. Maybe he caught a cold, or maybe his health kind of took a turn. Now, what I'm kind of getting at is, it's almost like this coronavirus. In winter, you're going to be more susceptible to infection than in summer. And obviously at the time that he's going out is between the seasons. It's sort of February, March. And it's not particularly warm in France at this time of the year. Right now in Paris, it's 13 degrees Celsius maximum, 5 degrees Celsius. That is 55 degrees Fahrenheit or 42 degrees Fahrenheit. That's France, and France is obviously in the north of the country. Van Gogh was in the far south, in Arles. So Arles is a little bit warmer than Paris. Right now in March, the temperatures are around about 16 degrees maximum and 7 degrees minimum, which is still on the cool to cold to chilly side, right? That is 61 degrees Fahrenheit maximum, 44 degrees Fahrenheit minimum. So it is possible that he caught a cold, or that by going outside for an extended time when he traveled to Arles, that he got himself into trouble. But it's also possible that he did that and he drank and that he went to a brothel or something like that. It could also be that when he arrived in Arles, he discovered firsthand how unwelcome he was. Obviously the last time he was in Arles, the police were called and the people wanted him out of there. Now he's back, the guy from the madhouse. And, if he's not going to go to Paris, where else is he going to go? To Arles? And he probably didn't get a very happy reception then. That probably was a great knock to his confidence as well. How am I going to go back to Paris if this is how they received me here? Okay, so let's return to the rest of the letter. So obviously he'd felt weak, but he made an attempt to write, and then he felt like he had some more energy or whatever, and then he resolved to write a little bit more. One final point I just want to make before we go to the rest of the letter is, I kind of have the impression, and again it's hard to know without seeing the response from Theo, but Van Gogh was kind of saying to his brother, I want to come up to Paris, can you send me some money for a suit, and I want to do this and I want to do that. And his brother is preoccupied with the newborn child and his new wife, and knows that his brother's kind of a bit of a difficult dude to live with, and maybe doesn't really want him back in Paris. And maybe Van Gogh was quite hurt by the fact that he didn't really hear from Theo, or if he did hear from Theo, Theo wasn't kind of welcoming him back with open arms. Do you follow that? It's like Van Gogh is kind of getting excited, saying, well, I'm so glad I've solved this, and the art critic liked my work, I'm back. But instead of his family aren't feeling the same way about that. And that may have made him feel very depressed and very unhappy. So that's also a possibility. Okay, so back to the letter. I take up this letter again to try to write. It will come little by little. The thing is that my head is so bad. Without pain, it is true, but altogether stupefied. I must tell you that there are, as far as I can judge, others who have the same thing wrong with them that I have, and who, after having worked part of their life, are reduced to helplessness now. It isn't easy to learn much good between four walls, that's natural. But all the same, it is true that there are people who can no longer be left at liberty as though there were nothing wrong with them. And that means I'm pretty well or altogether in despair about myself. Perhaps I might really recover if I were in the country for a time. So I'm going to just stop there for a second. And there's more to read, but I just want to analyze that little piece for a second. So what he's saying is he's still not feeling great, and he's trying to write a little bit more in the letter, and it's coming slowly what he needs to say. And then he describes the condition of his head and his mind. And he says, I'm not really feeling any pain, but I kind of feel stupefied, which is another word for stunned, dazed, befuddled, kind of senseless, almost dumbfounded, but basically where you're just unable to really think. It's almost like being drunk but without the alcohol present, right? Just kind of in a daze. It's almost that feeling where if someone woke you up in the middle of the night with a loud noise, you'd kind of be stupefied, right? And for those people who are convinced Van Gogh was mad or had bipolar or whatever it was, he kind of puts that diagnosis to rest, or kind of to the test, when he says, I must tell you that there are, as far as I can judge, others who have the same thing wrong with them that I have. And he describes it as they worked part of their life, but then they reduced to helplessness. And that's kind of what he's talking about, is there's just this feeling of helplessness, that one becomes paralyzed, stupefied, your mind isn't working very well anymore. And we may not be familiar with it as like a common condition, but bear in mind, syphilis in that time was known as the French disease. It was very well known in France. And the lifespan for men in France at that time, I believe, was around about 41 years old. And obviously Van Gogh didn't quite live the average kind of life as any other Frenchman. I think he indulged a lot more in, he wasn't married, bear that in mind, so he indulged a lot more in the rigors of going to a brothel and of drinking heavily and of, you know, being alone and without someone taking care of him and all that kind of thing, and, you know, of being a fairly poor person, not destitute, not like a beggar, but also not in a very comfortable kind of married, taken care of situation. Does that make sense? But what he's kind of talking about here is that he's noticed that a lot of other people have gone the same route that he seems to be going, which is living their lives and then suddenly reduced, as he says, to helplessness. And that does sound like kind of an infection building up. It doesn't sound like a guy slowly going mad, does it? It doesn't sound like... He's not talking about his hearing voices or being troubled by nightmares or anything like that. He's just talking about a very simple thing of being dazed and feeling helpless, right? And his remedy for himself is, I think I might recover if I were in the country, if I went into the countryside. And this is kind of a change to what he said in his previous letter, where I think he was talking about going to Paris and maybe even Antwerp or something like that. Okay, so let's go back to the letter. He says, before I get back to the letter, to return to the paragraph we looked at, he talks about, it's true that there are people who can no longer be left at liberty as though there were nothing wrong with them. And in a way, it's almost like he's acknowledging to his brother, you know, I need to get out of here. I need to get out of this asylum. But I understand that might be dangerous for certain people. Some people can't be left at liberty. And it's almost as if he's kind of acknowledging that his brother might be thinking this, and he's kind of saying, I understand that, but I will be okay. Doesn't that make sense? And he's talking about recovering. He's not talking about, I'm feeling suicidal or I'm feeling incredible despair. He does mention that, but, and we'll get to that in a second, but he's talking about his liberty. He's talking about, I might recover. He's talking about, he's trying to make the effort to get out of the circumstances he's in. He wants to get well. Okay, so let's get back to the letter. He says, my work was going well, the last canvas of branches in blossom. You will see that it was perhaps the best, the most patiently worked thing I had done, painted with calm and with a great firmness of touch. And the next day, down like a brute. So, here once again, we're getting a great diagnosis from him of his own condition. He's talking about how one day he felt completely fine. He was working patiently. He was working well. He had a firm grasp of the brush. And he says he painted with calmness and that it was going well. And then he says the next day he was kind of floored. He just couldn't work. So it's kind of like spells of dizziness that sort of come and go, right? And then let's go back to the letter. He says, difficult to understand things like that, but alas, it's like that. I have a great desire, however, to start working again. But Gogh also writes that he, and he is robust, also despairs of being able to go on. And isn't it true that we often hear the same story about artists? My poor boy, just take things as they come. Don't be grieved over me. It will encourage and sustain me more than you think. To know that you ate running your household well. Then after a time of affliction perhaps, peaceful days will come again for me too. But all the same, I will send you some canvases in a little while. So there's quite a lot going on in that particular paragraph. He talks about how difficult it is to understand what's going on with him, but he says I have a great desire to start working again. So there's nothing really wrong with his motivation to paint. And he says it's something that Gogh also has, that, and he says he is robust, he's healthy, but he despairs of being able to go on. And so this seems more to be about, they want to paint, but are they going to be able to? Are they going to be able to live on their work or whatever it is? Van Gogh does mention something about it will encourage and sustain me to know that you ate running your household well. Which seems to be him saying that I want you to run your home properly. Don't worry about me. Something like that. And again, you must think about what Van Gogh wants. Is he kind of wants his younger brother's permission to say, okay, come to Paris, or okay, leave the asylum. I will send you some money so that you can do that. And what he seems to be saying to him is, look, I understand that I'm not well, I'm not 100% well, but I'm also it's kind of normal to have these episodes, and I'm just happy if you run your household fine, and hopefully I'll be okay. Seems to be what he's saying. And then he also says, I will send you some canvases in a little while. So he's kind of undertaking that he's going to get back to work. Okay, and then there are 3 paragraphs left to go through. I'm going to quickly read through them. Russell wrote me too, and I think it is kind of him to have written, showing that he does not altogether forget us. On your part, speak of him from time to time, so that people may know that though he works alone, he is a very sound man, and I think he will do good things like what one used to see in England, for instance. He is 1,000 times right to barricade himself a bit. Remember me to the Pissarros. Very shortly I'm going to read the letters more calmly, and I hope to write again tomorrow or the next day. And that's kind of where he ends the letter, just saying that he intends to write the next day. So he's thinking about a lot of other people. He's thinking about Gogh. He's thinking about a guy called Russell, who has apparently barricaded himself at home and is kind of working alone. And then he talks about the Pissarros, and the Pissarros I think we will get to later on. There's quite a lot of art from the Pissarros from Pissarro in Auvers-sur-Oise. So we'll look at some of that. So just for some context in terms of this letter, on February the 24th, which was it was 4 days after his last letter in February to his mother. And so on February 24th, Dr. Peyron wrote to Theo that Vincent had again had an attack after spending 2 days in Arles, right? So the attack happened obviously very shortly after February the 20th, when Vincent was so excited, and obviously he was in a good mood about everything that I've mentioned. And so he went to Arles, and immediately after that he had an attack. And so the question is, what was he doing in Arles? And that's why I'm suggesting, didn't he sort of revert to his old ways, which is going to a brothel, drinking absinthe, and that kind of thing? And you might say, well, what does that have to do with his mental state or whatever? It may have something to do with the ability of syphilis to kind of invade his body. So in other words, if he drinks a lot, his body is then more susceptible to infection. And I was once in a situation where I stayed with an American in South Korea, and he arrived, and every single night he went out and drank, and then he caught a cold, and he just continued doing that, and then he eventually got pneumonia, and he was eventually coughing blood. So I think there is a relationship, you can say, between kind of drinking and kind of to excess. If you have an underlying condition, it's going to exacerbate it because you're not taking care of yourself. And again, I'm just trying to show you that all the problems with Van Gogh don't necessarily boil down to him being mad or boiling down to some kind of mental condition. It could also be a pre-existing physical condition that's just being worsened by him doing certain things. So apparently after Van Gogh went to Arles, he had to be brought back to St.Remy in a carriage, and it was not known where he had spent the night. So you kind of get the idea that when he went to Arles, he was sort of like a bum, that he either slept in the street or that he maybe slept in a brothel, but he certainly didn't have somewhere that we know of to sleep. And this also refers to a picture representing an Arlesian, so a local from Arles, which he had taken along with him to Arles, was never found. And then it refers to on April the 1st, which is basically 2 weeks after this letter, Dr. Peyron wrote again that the attack was lasting longer this time. So Van Gogh then had another attack, and it apparently proved that the trips to Arles were bad for him. That taking any trips were bad for him. And so you can kind of understand that his brother Theo would be very circumspect about the whole idea of Vincent leaving the asylum. So even though his brother is saying, I think I need the countryside, I think I need to get out, Dr. Peyron's kind of saying something else. He's saying, look, this guy's having attacks, and when he goes out, things don't go very well. And so his brother's obviously not sure what to do. The thing I want you to just concentrate on again is when Vincent writes his letters, they're not incoherent. What he writes makes complete sense. Just like the art that he's painting is coherent. And that's why I say you can't explain what is going on with him as madness or him being troubled, like ultra depressed or whatever. What's going on with him is something else. It's not really affecting his mind, other than that he kind of passes out, or that he can't think clearly, but not thinking clearly in the sense of someone with a mental illness. It's more someone not thinking clearly from the perspective of being physically weak, right? It's from that perspective. So the seat of his problem isn't in his mind, it's in his body. Does that make sense? Okay, so the next letter is from Theo on the 29th of March, and it kind of answers what I was saying earlier, which is Vincent wrote those letters to his brother on the 20th of February, and to his mother, and we don't really know what he got back, but what we do know is that this letter that he wrote on the 15th, his brother took 2 weeks to get back to him. And you might, I think you can be justified in kind of saying that his brother probably was scratching his head, trying to think about how to deal with this complicated situation. But also, his brother's busy with an infant that he's looking after. His brother's looking after his young family. And so he's sort of worried about his brother, but he's also kind of maybe a little bit neglectful of him, maybe forgetting about him a little bit and kind of getting caught up. But he nevertheless does write to his brother about 2 weeks later. So we will deal with the letter on the 29th of March, on the 29th of March. I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to be doing on this channel between now and then, because I've got a feeling the Durst trial is going to discontinue for the foreseeable period. If that does happen, then there will be more content on Van Gogh, and I will come back to that analysis that I meant to do of the accidental death that has been put forward, which is the latest theory, the most recent theory, the most sort of credible theory put forward by Naifa and Smith in their book Van Gogh the Life. And it also seems to be supported by the Van Gogh Museum. And I'm going to be kind of tearing that theory to shreds. This whole thing that there was kind of a juggling of a gun, and Van Gogh kind of got shot in that kind of accidental conflagration. I just don't believe it's true at all. And the way that I'm going to prove to you that it's not true is I'm going to eventually present you with a scenario of a better scenario that makes more sense, that's anchored in history and fact and the character of the people involved. And I'm going to say either that happened and it was just an accident that you can't really tie to anything, or this person who felt this way about that and who knew this and etc., 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 and had this motive to shoot Van Gogh. And then that's what you're going to be left with. Okay, so as I say, I will deal with the accidental death between now and the 29th, but how much I deal with it will depend on whether the Durst trial is postponed or not. Does that make sense? Something else to mention, I did do a live today on Patreon. It was 123 minutes long, so you can maybe listen into that. There was just discussions about the Chris Watts case and many other high-profile cases and the potential impact of family dysfunction and also things like holding grudges and that kind of thing. Things in the backstory, whether that can have an impact on crimes and criminals. So that was what we spoke about. And then I also posted an interesting episode on self-esteem on Patreon. And then there will also be something likely tomorrow on the ego, the impact of the ego on the Chris Watts case. Thank you for listening. I hope wherever you are in the world, you are staying safe. It's also very important just to control your anxiety. You know, it's easy to become very fearful and even panic given what feels like something that needs to pass by, but this coronavirus is going to be with us for quite a long time. Definitely weeks, probably 1 or more months. So it's going to be with us for quite a long time, and one needs to be just, take care of yourself and one another. Take care of, don't, in terms of your usage of social media and reading the news, if you're getting more fearful that you can't sleep at night, don't pay too much attention to it. Deal with your immediate environment, not what's going on in the rest of the world. Deal with your situation in your home, in your neighborhood, in your community, and stay safe and stay well. And I will see you guys next time.